there are no bad things that ever happen. There are just meanings that you can give experiences that make it very difficult for you.
But yeah, David, I've worked so hard on my mindset, stayed positive, done everything right. So why does it feel like everything is falling apart?
What I'm wanting you to do is be even more open. I'm not just saying, hey, paint some lipstick on a pig. Let's just pretend that this is a positive experience because, positive thinking is going to get us through the other side. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, let's take a deep, fundamental, first principled look at our lives and at what we're creating collectively and at how life is co-creating with us. And let's realize that every experience that we've had that we deemed bad led to something great. Bad things lead to better things. And so when you realize that, those bad things stop being bad. For this conversation, we're going to go deep. And if you've had something going on in your life recently, I'm sure at some point you have. We've all had something that happened that we didn't like. Maybe it was all of a sudden losing a job that you loved, or having your lover in your relationship leave you, or maybe even cheat on you. Perhaps it's a diagnosis or a prognosis that you received around your health, or maybe it was a loss of a loved one. There are all kinds of things that happen in our lives that we label as bad, and they seem bad. And maybe they are bad. I don't know. We're going to explore that today on this episode. My hope for you is that you can change your perception of the experiences as you have them, so that you can live in more joy and be in more calm and be more connected to spirit, and so that you can more consistently be moving towards creating what you want in your life. And a lot of times things happen to us that seem bad and we get entangled and caught up with them. So we're going to dive into that today. We're going to break down this why bad things happen to good people into three categories that we're going to look at. Number one is just the day-to-day things that happen in our life, right? The shit that shows up that we don't prefer, and that we feel like we have to tolerate, or kind of sometimes we get entangled with, and it takes us time and energy to release ourselves of that experience. The second one is what's going on in the world today. I don't know if you've noticed or if you experience it the same way I do, but it seems like there's a lot of things happening on a global level, a national level, things that affect us in terms of our bank accounts, in terms of our healthcare. There are wars going on in the world. There are pandemics. There are recessions. I don't think any of us would really deem these things as good. So why are these bad things happening to us, good people? And number three, personal tragedy. We're going to take a look at the loss of a loved one. There seems to be no good explanation for why a parent should ever have to experience their child with a terminal disease, why we have things in the world like sexual abuse or child trafficking. And we're going to try to give some context to this, because one of the things that I believe is that we exist, we live in a loving, intelligent reality, in a loving universe, that actually everything, and this is one of the fundamental tenets of how I try to experience the world, everything is happening for our greatest growth, our greatest prosperity, and our greatest evolution. And there's really no exception to that rule. And so, well, how could these bad things be happening if there's a loving God or a loving Jesus or a loving Allah or a loving universe or a loving force that is governing or dictating or co-creating the different circumstances and situations and experiences that we have? And I want to move into sharing with you what's called the parable of the wise farmer. And the parable of the wise farmer looks something like this. There was a wise farmer, and the wise farmer had a horse, and the horse ran off. And the ignorant neighbor said to the wise farmer, "Oh, what a tragedy. Your horse, your only horse, has escaped and is gone, and now you have no horses." And the wise farmer responded, "Who knows what's good or bad?" And a few days later, his horse came back with 10 wild stallions who followed him back. And so now the wise farmer had 11 horses, and the ignorant neighbor said, "Oh, what an incredible thing that's happened to you. This is such a blessing. You now have 11 horses." And the wise farmer said, "Well, who knows what's good or bad?" The wise farmer's son was out riding one of the wild stallions, and he got bucked from the back of the horse, and he ended up severely breaking his ankle. And the ignorant neighbor said to the wise farmer, "Oh, what a tragedy. Your son is now, broken his ankle." And the wise farmer says, "Well, who knows what's good or bad?" Several weeks later, there was a big war, and the military and government came to take all of the young, able-bodied men and take them off to this war where they were all going to certainly die. And the ignorant neighbor says, "Oh, what a phenomenal stroke of luck. Your son isn't going to be taken off to the war where he's certainly going to die because he has a broken ankle." And the wise farmer said, "Who knows what's good or bad?" The reason why I share this parable with you, the wise farmer and I sort of differ in one thing. I actually think everything is good, is that life is a series of cause and effects, that there's a chain of events. If we look back in our life, that's all it is. It's a chain of events. And that in one way or another, you're going to experience things that you prefer and things that you don't prefer in that chain of events. And what we're going to see as we dive into this question of why bad things happen to good people is that all of the things that you cherish most in your life are also an effect of the things that are bad or the things that are problems. I experienced this in my own life, and we'll sort of transition into this, day-to-day bad things that happen as we look at them together. Back in my early 30s, I met a young woman who I thought was the woman of my dreams, and I dated her for, I don't know what it was, a year and a half, and she ended up dating someone else behind my back and cheating on me and leaving me, which was very devastating at that time. I had never experienced infidelity, and I was heartbroken. And when things didn't work out with her and her new boyfriend, she came back to me. And because at that time, I'm not saying this is the case anytime you get back together with someone, but at that time, because I didn't have a sense of self-esteem and self-confidence, certainly that I do today, I ended up getting back together with her, even though I knew she wasn't the right person for me to be with long term. And then she did the same thing with the same guy. So we can look at that and say, oh, this is just a bad thing, right? Like my spouse has cheated on me. My spouse has left me. And we could come up with all kinds of examples, right? You could think right now about something that's happened to you over the last week that you would deem as like a bad thing or a thing you don't prefer. It might be an employee leaving you if you're a business owner when it's unexpected, or a marketing campaign that you've put together that you've been spending a lot of time and energy on that doesn't work out. It could be an argument that you had with someone who's a coworker in your workplace, or finding out that your company is going to cut your pay, or that you didn't get a bonus. Or again, I've given you a lot of examples. It could be something involving your health. It could be something involving, you pursuing your passion and then realizing that there are some roadblocks that you didn't expect as you were pursuing your passion. Or maybe you have a hobby and it's a physical hobby and you've suffered an injury, right? That's a bad thing that happens. Well, someone who's very close to me in my life, who I spent about a third of my life with, is my Chihuahua, Dexter. Now, Dexter passed when he was 14 years old, which was about 5 years ago. And Dexter was the most important being in my life. I spent from 20 years old, from 30 years old till about 44 years old with Dexter. And he was with me through my drug and alcohol addiction. He was with me through the big change in my life of deciding that I was going to go out and teach and help people. He was with me as I attracted Carol, my soulmate. He was with me for all of my major milestones, other than the recent birth of my son. And so Dexter was one of the greatest blessings I've experienced in my life. I found Dexter because I decided that I was going to go get a Chihuahua. A friend of mine had a Chihuahua, and I love the breed. And this woman who I told you about found another woman in the city where I lived in Orlando who had puppies, Chihuahua puppies. And so we went one Sunday afternoon to go and take a look at these puppies. And I was going to pick out one or two or three of the other dogs that were there. But the girl that I was dating said, "Oh, look at that cute one in the back." He looked quite lethargic, to be honest with you. Very, very shy. Not the kind of puppy that I would have picked out. But because I was dating her, I ended up selecting Dexter. And Dexter changed my life forever. I never would have found Dexter if it was not for this experience of dating someone who ended up leaving me and cheating on me, not once, but twice. The other thing I'm aware of, and there are many things I'm aware of that were benefits that came out of this bad experience. Who knows what's good or bad? I would say it's all good. It's just a series of events that lead us to the best things in our life. Some of those things we don't prefer, But that experience also helped me get clear on the type of woman that I did want to be with, the type of values of the woman that I wanted to be with. And a lot of those values, if not all of them, as I got clear on desiring a partner who held those values, were what attracted Carol, my wife. So being with someone who wasn't someone that I ultimately wanted to be with, that I could have deemed as a bad experience, was part of me getting clear on what I actually do want and being able to have a vision for it and to create and materialize that in my life. And so I want you to think about those things that have occurred in your life. Maybe you can leave a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, you could just contemplate it. If you're listening and you're on the go on the podcast, but again, go back in your past and find something that was not a quote unquote good experience, but it was part of life, intelligence, the universe, God's way of guiding you to something that you actually truly cherish today. Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a job opportunity, maybe it's a certain amount of money that you've earned, maybe it's a friendship that you value. But what you'll see is that there's an intelligent design to our life where we experience things that we don't prefer because they redirect us or support us in creating, being, doing, and having the things that we value most in our life. And by going through those bad experiences, we get even clearer on what it is that we do want. And that's a very important part of achieving any type of goal or materializing or manifesting any type of vision. So these bad things are essentially the seeds for everything good that we experience in our life. And you'll notice as well that as you go back and contemplate something that perhaps you had deemed as a bad thing, it also helped to shape you. It helped to prepare you for being the person. Maybe it's developing the skills or, again, the character traits or qualities or values of who you are today that had you not developed those skills or traits or values, you wouldn't have some of the things that you value today, some of the things that you appreciate most. So, are there really any bad experiences in our life? Well, it's certainly possible that we could look at some of these more simple personal examples and go, hey, yeah, I could see how this was necessary. And in fact, the discomfort was temporary. And if I experience something like that today, it actually might not be as big of a deal because I've become an even more expansive person as a result of that experience. What about the things that we're observing as we look out into the world today? I mean, it really doesn't matter what side of the argument that you sit on, but there's a lot of division out there, right? There's certainly an abuse of the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, more or less, we would call that organized crime. These are companies that have actually paid billions of dollars in criminal reparations for knowingly providing their clients, meaning you and I, with medical products that they knew would do us harm. I mean, look what happened in the banking system crisis, right? Everything that came out in terms of the banking sector and the executives of those companies knowing that they were piling a tremendous amount of our money on top of risky debt, right? That they were selling mortgages to people who shouldn't ordinarily qualify for mortgages in order to make money, which was basically a tinderbox for the entire housing industry and our entire economy. And then as that meltdown occurred, our own government gave them almost $1 trillion to fix the problem, which they didn't hand off to any of us. Instead, they went and bought up all of our assets and resold them to us at a premium price. You look at the military industrial complex, right? Fundamentally, there's a problem in the world. It's a bad thing that we have private corporations who are incentivized and motivated to have more wars, and that they're able to lobby our political representatives in order to influence government policy, right? You could look at this and say these are bad things. Whether you want to agree that there's a greenhouse effect taking place, there's no argument over whether or not we're destroying habitat around the world, right? The Great Plains are disappearing. The Amazon rainforests are disappearing. There's a holocaust upon the oceans. These are bad things, are they not? We could go back in time. We could look at something like the Holocaust. I mean, certainly we would define that as a bad thing, right? 6 million Jews were murdered over the course of 4 or 5 years. My family, some of them, my mother's side and some on my father's side, had to flee Europe. That's how they came to the United States. My father's family was Jewish and my mother's family was living in Latvia and Germany at the time, right? Bad things. So what is going on? Is it possible that we could live our lives trusting that there is an omniscient, omnipotent, loving intelligence that is always working for our greatest growth, our greatest prosperity, and our greatest evolution? Because if we can truly have faith that every experience that we experience personally or that we experience collectively is actually a part of a loving universe, that would allow us to relax a little bit more, wouldn't it? That would allow us to be calm through the storm, knowing that whatever we're experiencing in the moment is just part of a series of cause and effects that is ultimately playing out for our greatest joy, our greatest expansion, our greatest abundance, and our greatest prosperity. It certainly doesn't feel that way when you look out into the world today, does it? Hey, it's David. Quick announcement before we get back to your episode. Our annual event, the Powerful Living Experience, is coming up. There's a link in the show notes, or you can visit powerfullivingexperience.com. Check out the video of last year's event. We're going to be bringing together 1,000 impact-driven entrepreneurs, leaders, and game changers to spend 3 days doing what matters most. Going really, really deep on identifying the limiting beliefs and subconscious programs that are still preventing you from your full potential, and going through deep experientials and trainings and transforming them. We're also going to be getting into concepts like wealth creation, purpose, greatness, money, relationships, health. And if you're an entrepreneur, we're going to be spending about 20% of that event opening up my business playbook, the same strategies and tactics and techniques that we use to go from $0 to $30 million in an impact-driven business, while spending 90% of my time doing what I love. There's nothing like the Powerful Living Experience. Inc. named it a top 3 must-attend personal development event for entrepreneurs and leaders, and I want to see you there. We've got some discounted tickets right now, plus some additional bonuses. Again, all the information is in the link in the show notes, or you can jump on over to powerfullivingexperience.com, get registered, and I will plan on seeing you there along with 1,000 other impact-driven, incredible members of our community for 3 days that you will never forget. And now, back to your regularly scheduled episode. What you'll also notice is there is an organizing right now of the disgruntled, right? There's an organizing right now of people who have been touched in one way or another by a bad medical system, by a bad financial system, by a bad governance system, that have been touched by environmental toxins, that have been touched by, what other ways could we be affected, right? That have been touched in some way, shape, or form, that have experienced something bad personally, who are now saying, hey, I think we need a better system. Right? Many of us have been affected in some way, shape, or form, offended by the current system. And what that's creating is a unification of those who have been offended. I like offended more than disgruntled. Disgruntled almost makes it sound like you don't have a right to be unhappy. But we've been offended by a system and a structure that's been evolving over the last couple thousands of years, and is most recently represented in the capitalistic democracy of the United States, that has become some sort of distorted form of capitalism that is swallowing democracy. We have censorship taking place. Now, you may be of an opinion that certain things should be censored, right? I happen to be of an opinion that if you don't have free speech, you don't have a democracy. So you can look at all of these things and go, well, that's bad, right? I mean, that's a bad thing. When the Twitter files came out and we found out that our government was influencing internet platforms to silence certain people because of their perspectives. I'm not being political here. I'm just saying, there are some things that I think most of us agree on. We called those the Bill of Rights. We called those the Constitution of the United States. And if you're tuning in, right, from somewhere outside of the United States has been the aspiration from a democracy and freedom standpoint. And we're seeing a lot of those freedoms being disrupted in the world. That's bad, isn't it? And I get asked this question a lot from people in our coaching programs, when I run my Zoom calls, when we're at our live events. And I'm a little bit of a wise farmer Who knows what's good or bad? I actually believe that this is a process of improvement. I believe in the certainty of the goodness of the future. And I believe that we have systems that were put in place with an older consciousness, a more narcissistic consciousness, a more survival-based consciousness, a less loving consciousness. And I also think that we are each individually in the process of transforming that ancient consciousness, right? We're trying to heal the traumas and the misunderstandings that have been passed down through our own individual lineages. And we call that becoming more spiritual. We do the personal growth work. As we do that, we downregulate our nervous system. We start to show up and resonate in a higher level of frequency, and that frequency is love. And so we're all doing it individually, but we're still seeing what this collective external materialization is of our inner consciousness, right? You have angry thoughts. You have jealous thoughts. I know you're working through it to improve yourself, but we're seeing structures in the world that are reflective of that anger, reflective of that jealousy, reflective of that insecurity, reflective of that fear, right? Because if we didn't have that inside of us, then nothing external could, frankly, take advantage of what is inside of us. And so we're in a process of growth and evolution, and that's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But the way that you improve externally is the same way I improved internally. You go date somebody who you don't like, who treats you poorly, in order to get clear on who you do want so you can attract someone who treats you like a king or a queen. That's how it works. And so we're experiencing these things externally that we don't prefer, like the military-industrial complex and the pharmaceutical-industrial complex, and a government that can be bought by capitalistic influences, and the destruction of our habitats, and the degradation of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and things like censorship and surveillance that are playing out, because that's helping us get abundantly clear that we want something different. Now the question is, what do you want? Right? I have a vision for the world that's kind of like Wakanda, if you've seen Black Panther, right? People integrated with nature and living with technology and living in harmony and living intelligently and living spiritually. That vision comes out of experiencing something that you don't prefer. It's part of the chain of cause and effect. This is the process of, and I want you to hear me, civilization. We're becoming more civilized by acknowledging where we are not being civilized. Now, the uncivilization or the uncivilized is showing up differently than it did 1,000 years ago. I mean, 1,000 years ago, you'd just go from tribe to tribe, groups of barbarians or Huns or whoever it was, and you'd rape and pillage and destroy each other. By the way, all of that is stored in our consciousness, which is what we're working out here in these conversations that we have on Changed Mind, right? That's in you, and you're transforming it into your personal power. That was uncivilized before. Uncivilized today has a level of sophistication and technology and artificial intelligence. Some people call it scary. I just think that it's a new level, new devil, and new opportunity for transforming that into light and truly making this heaven on earth and taking care of the garden that we have been born into. It's a process. It's a process. So you take note of those things that you don't like, just like you did in your own life. But if you can then bring your attention to what the opportunity is, then you can focus your vision and your action and your emotions in a direction of intelligent creation. That's the way you handle what you observe externally right now in the world. You may still be experiencing the effects of a recession personally, or a pandemic, but that's different than getting entangled with it and being unable to direct your focus and attention in positive ways. We can do that when we realize that this isn't a bad thing that's happening to us. The meaning that we're giving the experience is what's determining whether it's good or bad. It's just an experience. And it's going to lead to something even better through this chain of cause and effects that goes on and on and on and on, both in our individual lives as we allow ourselves to grow and expand and receive even more through that chain of events, and as we experience and create a world collectively. There will be ups, there will be downs, but the direction is upward if you allow that momentum to carry you that way. And that's why you see some people, regardless of what's going on in their personal life or regardless of what's going on in the collective, who are able to thrive. They're able to be happy. They're able to be healthy. They're able to be prosperous. They're able to be abundant because they understand that there are no bad things that ever happen. There are just meanings that you can give experiences that make it very difficult for you. What I'm wanting you to do is be even more open. I'm not just saying, hey, paint some lipstick on a pig. Let's just pretend that this is a positive experience because, positive thinking is going to get us through the other side. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, let's take a deep, fundamental, first principled look at our lives and at what we're creating collectively and at how life is co-creating with us. And let's realize that every experience that we've had that we deemed bad led to something great. Bad things lead to better things. That's how it works. And so when you realize that, those bad things stop being bad. Now, I'm not saying we don't prefer the Holocaust, and I'm not saying in the vernacular of our language that we can't call it bad. I'm just saying recognize how the superorganism of consciousness and intelligence is materializing and manifesting over time. Part of the process is this change through different chapters that we don't prefer, but it always leads us to a better place. And so if we're willing to be uncomfortable in the short term, we will always be rewarded in the long term. And then you can say, well, Dave, how could you possibly be saying this? 6 million Jews died. Well, this also takes us to, hey, how could it possibly not be a bad thing when someone's child is diagnosed with a terminal illness, right? Or when we have things in the world, almost as we were talking about with global issues like child trafficking, or when someone is sexually abused. Well, I'm going to divide this into two categories. I want to talk about, for example, sexual abuse, physical abuse, these bad things that happen to us when we are children, that happen to children today. And I want to connect us back to this idea that those things that we experience that seem the most tragic in our life shape who we are. And so if I look at the emotional abuse that I experienced as a child, it shaped who I am today. It was the seed for my greatest qualities and my greatest personal traits. Growing up in a family where I was made to feel like I wasn't good enough, or at least that's how I experienced it, brought me into my drug and alcohol and pornography addiction, which brought me into personal growth, which brought me into spiritual connection, which brought me into discovering my purpose, which brought me into being able to impact and help hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, which brought me into this conversation with you today. And so we always see, we have a tremendous transformational technology called the forgiveness framework that we take people through in order to heal the early traumas, abuses, and resentments that we take on, in order to see that, and this is what I believe, there was some sort of spiritual agreement between you and that person before both of you came into the world, that you would have this experience, because Earth right now is a trauma-based learning environment. And so in order for us to expand and grow, at least up until now, but I believe that's changing, topic for another episode, we learn through our traumas. And so my parents, I believe, decided that they would come into the world to experience their own traumas, to pass those traumas on to me, knowing I would transform them in my lifetime and that would benefit millions of other people. So I believe that whatever happened to you or what happens to other children, while I don't prefer that it happens, I also am wise enough not to question how intelligence operates in our lives, but to trust that is for our greatest growth, our greatest prosperity, and our greatest evolution. And I can see in my own life and the lives of so many other people that the traumas we experienced became unpacked over time and became the greatest frequency of our personal power. Now, we can also talk about, again, this idea or what actually happens in the world where, a child has a terminal disease. I can't begin to explain what purpose that serves, or when someone gets diagnosed with cancer, or when we have the loss of a loved one. I know we're very attached to life. We're very attached to this third dimensional experience, even though we are at our essence spirit that comes into the body and is blessed with a very physical experience of life. We know that reality is an illusion. It's a bunch of vibration. It's a bunch of energy. It's a bunch of moving particles and atoms and molecules that are mostly nothing. But because of our five senses, we experience this reality as very real. We get attached. We have heart. We have emotion. I can't imagine if something unexpected happened to someone I love, And I lost them, right? I've lost very few people in my life. I lost my grandfather. I lost my Chihuahua. What I believe is that we come into this experience and we go, and we come again to learn, and we go, and we come again to learn, and we go. This is the concept of reincarnation or incarnation, and that we have many lives, and that we spend many lives with the people who we're spending our life with now, and that when we lose someone, we will be with them again, both in and after life and in another incarnative experience. That doesn't mean that it makes it easy. This part of the conversation is not to try to convince you that it's a good thing, right? When we experience something like this, or that you shouldn't fully feel your emotions and mourn and be sad, or that it should be easy for you. That's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is trying to explain why bad things happen to good people. And the answer is beyond our comprehension. But what I'm encouraging you to do is to trust, because you can see it in your own individual life. And maybe you can also see it as I'm articulating what's happening in the world with this change and expansion of consciousness that's going through this transformation, through the systems that we're seeing today, and sort of the beginning of the bottoming out or the falling out of the old structures and the emergence of the new. That same logic or philosophy or law is playing out even in the most tragic personal experiences of our own lives, right? We'll only know when we get there, right? Whether or not we reunite with our loved ones, whether or not, if we pass over to the other side, we're given the opportunity to have full understanding of what this life was about. And we're able to see that those people who we came in with, we had agreements that we were going to serve each other in order to experience different things, again, in this trauma-based learning environment where we experience a lot of discomfort and we transform that discomfort into a new understanding. And we become more tolerant, we become more compassionate, we become more loving, we become more faithful, we reconnect with spirit, we reconnect with ourselves. That seems to be the process. And somewhere in all of that, some of us, maybe you, for whatever reason, has experienced something incredibly traumatic and loss. And I'm sorry if that's your experience. And my goal today is just to give you a little bit more context on how I believe life works, and to begin to question, when you're experiencing something, whether or not it's truly a bad thing. Because outside of this veil beyond which we cannot view, called death, almost every other experience, when we stop to really observe it, the bad things have always led to better things. And if you can remember that when the bad things are happening, the bad things stop being so bad. So I hope this was valuable for you today. I want you to experience life in the full joy that I believe you're meant to experience it in. And a conversation like today isn't a conversation that we normally have with our friends. It's not a conversation that you normally hear even in personal growth. But I think it's an important one, because if we can continue to reorient ourselves to the fact that we live in a loving, creative, intelligent universe, and that moment by moment life is working for us, that's going to help us to relax, to calm down, to show up more in our personal power so that you can achieve your full potential and have the health, wealth, prosperity, abundance, connections, and passion that is your birthright, so that you can have a powerful living experience. As always, I love you so much. Do something good for yourself today, and do something good for another person. If you know anybody who needs to hear this episode, please, please, please share it. And I will see you on the next episode. Hey, it's David. Hop on over to davidbear.com. Click right here. There's also a link in the show notes, and sign up for our newsletter. You'll get immediate access to my free Mind Hack ebook, as well as a couple of trainings to help you master the inner game. This is a great way to stay informed and be a part of our community and be notified of special announcements. Click below, head on over to the website, get subscribed. If you loved this video, make sure you check out this one or this one, and I will see you in the next video.